Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a huge story, how Canada is hitting the reset button on its entire economy. Why? Because it's facing a massive economic challenge from its number one trading partner, the US. And instead of just taking the hit, Canada's launching a radical new game plan. So let's start with this. It's a pretty wild statement from Canadian investor Michael Gentile. But honestly, it kind of perfectly captures what's going on. A kick in the butt that forced an entire country to completely rethink its future. So what did that kick actually look like? All right, before we get into Canada's new strategy, we've got to understand the problem that started it all. And let's be clear, this wasn't just some small disagreement. This was a massive shock to the system. I mean, think about it. For generations, the US and Canada had this incredibly smooth partnership. Goods just flowed back and forth. But then, new tariffs came into play. And suddenly, that whole relationship was thrown into chaos, putting jobs and entire industries at risk. And this wasn't just a threat on paper. The impact was real, and it was immediate. Canada's economy actually shrank by 1.6% in a single quarter. That's a direct hit, all because exports suddenly dropped off. For any modern economy, that is a huge blow. But the fallout wasn't just about the money. It got cultural, it got personal. According to polls from Pew, a majority of Canadians, we're talking 59%, started seeing the United States not as their closest ally, but as their single biggest threat. That is a wild turnaround in how people felt. And you can literally see the pressure building right here on this chart. The tariff rate on Canadian goods just kept climbing, making everything more expensive and way less competitive. This visual makes that economic threat totally tangible. You can see exactly why Canada felt like its back was against the wall. Okay, so out of that crisis, a new strategy was born. And we're not talking about a few small changes here and there. This was a total, top-to-bottom rethink of the country's economic future. So here's the really crucial part. Instead of getting bogged down in a never-ending trade war, Canada did something different. It looked inward. The government pivoted to this massive domestic nation-building agenda. The whole idea was to make its own economy stronger and more self-reliant. So what's in this game plan? Well, it really comes down to three core pillars. First, speed up the development of all those natural resources they have. Second, pour a ton of money into the foundations of the economy. We're talking housing and infrastructure. And third, and this one's really interesting, tear down their own internal trade barriers, making it easier for provinces to do business with each other. A stronger home market. And the sheer scale of this thing is, well, it's staggering. The government is trying to kickstart $500 billion in new private investment. To give you some perspective, that's about a quarter of the country's entire economic output. It is a massive, massive bet on Canada's own future. But of course, a plan this huge is bound to hit some speed bumps, right? You just don't try to transform an entire economy without running into a few roadblocks. And the path forward is, well, it's super complex. You've got political friction between the federal and provincial governments. You've got the absolute necessity of getting approval from First Nations communities. And then there's just the reality that these huge projects take years and years to actually pay off. And if that's not enough, there are also calls for tax reform, plus that big continental trade deal is coming up for renegotiation. It's a lot. And this quote from a macro analyst, Ryan Carmichael, just hits the nail on the head. The potential for Canada is absolutely enormous. But turning that potential into reality, that's going to take a ton of patience and political willpower. The question isn't really if the plan can work, it's how long it's all going to take. So, what does all of this huge economic reboot, actually mean for investors? Let's shift gears from the plan to the potential profit and see where the opportunities might be hiding. This is the key question, right? I mean, when a country basically says, we're launching a $500 billion overhaul, that's going to create some serious waves. So if you want to get exposure to this historic shift, where do you even start? Well, one of the most direct ways is through infrastructure. The companies building the pipelines, the power grids, the roads, they're essential. A big name like Enbridge is sitting right in the middle of all this action, and it comes with a pretty solid dividend and a whole bunch of its own growth projects. And remember that first part of the plan, to fast-track resource development? Well, that points us directly to the mining sector. Companies like Alamos Gold, who are figuring out how to produce more while spending less, are perfectly positioned to benefit from this big national push. And the opportunities are really diverse.
You could go broad with an ETF like EWC, which gives you a piece of the whole Canadian economy, or you can get specific. The ripple effects from this reboot could be felt everywhere, from energy and materials all the way to financials and even consumer goods. Now, this slide highlights something really fundamental. The Canadian stock market is just built different than the US market. While the S&P 500 is over 40% tech stocks, the Canadian TSX is 60% financials, energy, and materials. We're talking about the world of hard, tangible assets. And this is exactly why it matters. If you're an investor who's looking to diversify away from all the high-flying tech stocks, or maybe you're looking for a built-in hedge against inflation, the Canadian market just offers a completely different flavor, and often with some really attractive dividends too. Which, of course, brings us to the final multi-billion-dollar question. This whole national pivot was born out of a crisis. The ambition is off the charts. The potential is clear as day, but the outcome? Well, that's far from certain. Will this massive gamble actually pay off and secure Canada's place in our crazy changing world? I guess only time will tell.